Good morning. What is reality? Reality is waking up early, making a video, and preparing to go to work. Next topic. No, what is reality? um, because in connection to narcissistic abuse, we learn about reality testing, which is a psychoanalytic term. We learn about a shared fantasy, a malignant shared fantasy of the narcissist. When we learn about a psychopath, we learn that they have no shared fantasy in connection to object relationships, which are relations to other people. And what we have not shed light on yet on my channel is that it is actually healthy to have a shared fantasy and normal. Therefore, it's rather alien that a psychopath has no shared fantasy with people. The psychopath lives in a shared fantasy with his or her goals. And and the narcissistic shared fantasy is therefore distorted and malignant because the narcissist has no object relationship. He only has a introject. This, I don't go down this rabbit hole this time, but it means that the narcissist is completely self-absorbed and is acting only with the introject, which means they entirely rely on fantasy. It means they are completely acting within their own fantasy that does not have any connection to reality testing. Therefore, we say the narcissist has impaired reality testing, but the psychopath has not. So a healthy person has introject constancy and object constancy and a shared fantasy and functioning reality testing. So a healthy person is a mix of a borderliner, a narcissist, and a psychopath. Sorry, I did not want to say that. I also will not keep on, you know, digging on this blasphemous comparison of Jesus and narcissism. But I just want to talk about one more symbolism in the Bible that I found very impressive, and that was that Jesus appears as the Lion of Judah that appears as a slain lamb. So we have the symbol of a lion and the symbol of a slain lamb. The slain lamb, of course, is the perfect analogy for a sacrifice and therefore victimhood. The lion is a perfect symbol for grandiosity. There is no narcissism without a combination of victimhood and grandiosity. This is why this abuse is so confusing and disorienting. A healthy, strong person is on the first glance almost indistinguishable of a narcissist. And people in the dynamic of abuse, when they realize what is happening, will run a narrative. When they look for exiting this dynamic and looking for help, they will say, I'm victimized. And then they will realize, they will say, I'm victimized because I'm a strong person. The narcissist envied me. And then they will realize that the narcissist is running exactly the same narration, and this is so disorienting, okay? That's just on the side notes. The differences are subtle because the self of the narcissist, the false self, the grandiose self, is not rooted again in real accomplishments and real abilities, while the real self of a healthy person is rooted in real abilities, accomplishments, and a functioning self-assessment and reality testing. That just on the side notes. Okay, what is reality? Because we talk about the reality testing that is impaired in narcissists and borderliners. And there is no absolute reality. We are always divorced from an absolute reality, except we are probably, arguably, in a meditative state of just receiving it without grasping it, in a flow state, or mushin, or however you want to call it, maybe some special brain waves. There are different brain waves. You can check this out. There's these theta waves, and whatever. Is coffee the only real reality? No, I believe it's a fantasy. I think coffee is a beautiful fantasy. So what is reality? And we understand that a shared fantasy is healthy, okay? Reality, when we speak of reality, by the way, another analogy for why absolute reality cannot perceived is, I see it a little bit like when we look in space, we can look back in time when we analyze the light coming out of space. This is what the telescopes do when they look into deep space. And there is an event horizon. This is a limit of how far we can look and how far we can look back. And beyond that horizon, we cannot get any information. And this is a little bit the same as when we look at reality. We can't look at it, okay? We can't. Okay. Reality has, when we talk about reality and reality testing, we talk about that reality that is kind of an overlapping shared fantasy space with other people, with society, with large groups of people. It's a form of consensus, okay? It means a large group of people who belong together, maybe in a country, maybe in a state, but also in smaller clusters like families or workplaces or communal groups. They have a consensus and they correct each other. They come together and different egos collide, different self-images, different shared fantasies collide. Psychopaths are not there. They are not participating. They are manipulating and creating shared fantasies for others. That's scary. But normal people having shared fantasies in group dynamics, and they correct each other. They communicate. They give each other reality checks, and then a form of consensus is being made. When we drive a car and reach a street light, when the light is red, everybody stops because we have a consensus of what is red, and that we are not allowed to cross when it's red, and when it's green we start driving again, because we also have the consensus what is green. We agree on that, and we agree that when it's green you're allowed to drive. So this is a shared fantasy that we have a consensus about with others. Therefore, it becomes reality, but it is not absolute reality, because maybe one person sees red in a completely different way than another, but they agree that they call it red, and they agree on the implications it has for them. So this is basically reality. And this shows that reality has changed over time very much, because consensus has changed. So when we have moral changes, things have been agreeable. Imagine the time in Germany between 1933 and 1945. Psychopathic behavior was agreeable, was very agreeable. It was a consensus that this is reality. When we think of the ancient Greek times, they had different moral ideas. They had different heroic ideas. So they had different consensus. When we think of, they had different reality. When we think of the time of the Vikings, the rich mythological lore they had, they had no science or technology. I mean, they had access and tools. This was their technology. So they were technology evolved. Sorry, they had technology. The dragon ships were the most evolved ships at that time, by the way. But they had no science in that sense. So mythology was not demystified, or their mythology was imbued with a lot of magical thinking and magic. It was not like, we have our science and we believe in science, and this is just our cultural mythology. No, this was the science and the truth. So they really believed in these things. They had a consensus about that elves and giants and whatever they believed in, it was all real. This was reality for them. So when they saw the fog pouring down through in a valley, through over the mountains, through the forest, they saw a completely different reality than what we would see. They did not see condensed water molecules and an atmospheric phenomenon. When they saw aurora borealis, when they saw northern lights, they saw something different than that what we saw. They would call it a different reality because they had a consensus. These are some spirits or whatever, okay? So reality is based in a consensus. The consensus is made through coming together and giving each other corrections and reality checks. When a person within the group is repeatedly crossing the boundaries of another person, and this person kindly corrects this person, a consensus is made, reality is created. But when you do this to a narcissist that crosses your boundaries, your personal boundaries, and you kindly give him reality checks, they get a temper tantrum because the narcissist is acting based on the introject that he has. So he only interacts with himself and he sees you as part of him. And if you are not the way the narcissist wants you to be, when you're not the same as his introject, they get frustrated and get an outburst of rage to make you, to modify your behavior. They are frustrated like a child. They want reality to become their fantasy, like a child. So they don't rely on reality testing. They rather try to change reality. Okay. So we are living in a world with a lot of people. We have 8 to 9 billion people. So we're living close together. Why then is reality still dissolving? Because that is my claim. Reality is dissolving. And this is because of the atomization of people. And the atomization of people is a consequence of individuality thinking and individuality politic and identity thinking and identity politic. So everybody is allowed to be what they want to be and do what they want to do and think what they want to think and say what they want to say. So absolute individualism and thinking about your own identity, self-reflecting, endless self-reflecting, self-improvement, that can lead to creating a self-image instead of receiving identity from a correcting group that says, you're not that what you think. We see you, we experience you, and we realize who you are and we tell you who you are. So today it's not that way. Today everybody is what you want to be and say, identity and individuality. And the idea was good, but it led to a breeding ground of narcissism. Because the idea was, we have cultural societies, we have different religions, we want all of them to allow each other to be what they want to be. But this turned out to be a breeding ground for narcissism. Because this also means that people stop correcting others, because we have to accept everyone the way they are. And then suddenly everything is allowed. People can come up with all forms of self-conceptions, all kinds of self-expression. Everything is allowed. So people living in their fantasy, and we're not allowed to correct them. This is why reality dissolves, because there is no consensus anymore on anything. There is no overlapping shared fantasy anymore. Everybody lives in his fantasy bubble, and we can't correct people anymore, because then they have the right to be that. Okay? So this gives us to think about how much order do we want and how much guidelines do we need. By the way, I also believe that the reason why people come together as a necessity and willingly come together as a necessity is because of real external dangers and problems that have to be solved. Therefore, they collaborate and come together. This shows that poor people from poor countries, or in general, poor people collaborate more, are more together, are closer with each other. Families don't dissolve because they have to stay together. And they are more rooted in a shared fantasy and reality and less individualistic. They don't complain so much about everything, and they don't develop grandiose selves because they don't have the time to create a fantasy identity about them. And rich people are more isolated because they can. They don't have to collaborate. They are even afraid that others might steal from them. And they feel naturally grandiose. Therefore, they have to justify, why am I alone? Why am I isolated? Because I'm great and grandiose. Therefore, I have to defend myself, and others will be envious. And then they create a fantasy about them and leave reality. So this is the atomization of people. They are scattered, living in their own fantasy bubbles, and therefore reality is dissolving, and therefore reality testing will become impossible in this process at some point. Because there is no reality anymore. There is no common shared fantasy anymore. There is only an individual fantasy. And another thing that happens today is that the threats, the external threats, the dangers that make people come together are not real anymore, but manufactured. And this leads to other processes, but we can't go too deep into that. I might make a video about this. But briefly, it leads to the echo chambers that we have today. And living in such a fantasy that I described, these atomized people living in their own fantasy bubbles, is an immature state, an infantile state, a childish state of magic thinking, and therefore we need autocratic, strong leaders that protect us from the manufactured external threats. And we give up all autonomy, all selfhood to them. They are the makers, they protect us. They are the crazy individuals that are the only ones that can act and deal with the crazy world. We give up all authority to them, and we live in our regressed, fantastic space that they give us. And therefore, there are huge polarized groups of atomized people that are all following the same personalized, idolized, most of the time narcissistic, autocratic leader. That's a message for now. We can dive into this topic of these echo chambers and the regressed, atomized people in another video probably. Stay safe, and I hope I could explain something about what reality is. It is a shared fantasy space based on consensus and on giving each other constant reality checks that leads other people to correct their own fantasy about themselves to lead to a consensus about what reality is.